This is the grand finals of a Pokemon VGC tournament that I hosted for players that were disqualified from the Pokemon World Championships. Both of these players have already claimed a chunk of the $2,000 prize pool, but tensions remain high. The winner would earn the $1,500 grand prize, making this essentially a $1,000 Pokemon money match. On the one side we have Luca, the Italian Rain champion. He rode Pelipper all the way to the finals, using the defensive cover of Rain to keep his Grass and Steel-type teammates healthy. On the other side is Killua, the anonymous battler whose combination of the Genies and Nasty Plot Goldengo blasted through all competitors until Luca had been able to finally hand him his first loss of the tournament, just minutes prior. It all comes down to this best of 3. But wait a minute, what's going on here? Why are top-level players who qualified for the Pokemon World Championships playing VGC on my stream? Who are they, and why did I put up so much money for this tournament? Why did one of them choose to be anonymous, and why did I invite only disqualified players? To answer that question, we have to go to Yokohama, Japan. This August, hundreds of Pokemon players descended upon Yokohama, all hoping to be crowned the official world champion. It had been Pokemon VGC's biggest year yet. Tournaments in 2023 were massive, some of the biggest that VGC has ever seen. The World Championships in Yokohama were supposed to be the triumphant end to VGC's biggest season ever. To say the weekend did not live up to the hype would be an understatement. Instead, multiple players tweeted that this tournament would be their last time ever playing competitive Pokemon. The VGC World Championships are a 2-day tournament featuring hundreds of players who qualified by accumulating championship points throughout the past year of competition, mostly at live in-person tournaments, and spent a lot of money on traveling and registration fees in the process. The tweets started flying early on day 1. Tons of players were getting disqualified at hack checks for having generated or modified Pokemon on their teams. These generated Pokemon were not hacked in the sense that they would have a competitive advantage over legit Pokemon. When talking about gen Pokemon in this video, I'm exclusively talking about legitimate Pokemon acquired through illegitimate means, to save time on training, breeding, resetting, etc. Some players admitted that they got caught hacking. Others were legitimately shocked to find out that Pokemon they had acquired via trades had failed to pass the Pokemon Company's test. Hack checks exist at every official Pokemon tournament, but disqualifications for most of the year were few and far between. So what happened?
Hi everyone, I am Francesco and I play competitive Pokemon since I was a kid, and I'm from Italy. My history with Pokemon Worlds is I've qualified in the last 2 years, but I've been watching them since 2014. I actually got an invitation for Worlds in 2018 in the senior category, but I didn't go. After the pandemic hit, I started playing in a bunch of online tournaments, winning like a lot of money and doing well overall. So that gave me the confidence to play in real life major tournaments to actually qualify for the Pokemon World Championship in the Masters Division.
Francesco fell just shy of qualifying for Day 2 through the European Championship point standings, so he had to start from Day 1. When the judges came to collect him during his Round 5 match, sitting at 3-1, and just 2 wins away from advancing to Day 2, he had a feeling he knew what was about to happen. Francesco's team had gone through a bunch of changes in the days leading up to the event, so he asked a friend to put together his team for him, and the team was caught by the hack check. That, of course, is no defense. The Pokemon Company had actually sent out a warning prior to the event through email to players attending Worlds. It warned of a more advanced hack check at Worlds. Specifically, TPC said, using bold and underline, "We strongly recommend you do not use Pokemon provided to you by other people." Let's ignore, for a second, how blatantly this goes against so many of the Pokemon series' stated ideals. They warned the players. So why do it then?
The metagame was still developing like day after day, and you had to really keep up every single day to understand what the direction going into World Championship was. The team of the champion, for example, the guy that won the tournament, Shuei, people knew about the team only 10 days prior to the tournament. To change something like the Terra type on a Pokemon, for example, in my case, I changed 2 of them in the last week. It's a really tedious process. And if you don't have the materials in the game required, like you have to spend a bunch of time that you can spend testing the team instead.
Francesco made a fairly unique meta call, taking a Pelipper Rain squad to Japan. Unlike many of the Rain teams VGC has produced in the past, This one didn't use the rain to power up a Swift Swim Sweeper like Kingdra or Ludicolo. It did power up his Urshifu's water attacks, but its primary value actually was defensive, to protect his fire-weak Gholdengo and Amoonguss. In my tournament, Francesco was able to show off his team's power in his losers round 1 match, taking out a team built around Trick Room Ursaluna. Unfortunately for Francesco, he ran into a very tough matchup in round 2, another team similarly centered around Amoonguss and Gholdengo, and therefore able to take advantage of Francesco's weather. This is the player who eliminated Francesco at 5th place.
My name is Brady, and I am from Florida. I've been playing Pokemon since 2014, and inside my career, I have top cut the World Championships. I have been on what we like to call the Snowball, which is where they fly you out to all these different events, and I have won 3 regional championships.
Brady was one of the players disqualified, in his case after winning the first round of Swiss on day 1. So what happened?
So going into the tournament, I didn't actually know what I was going to be playing. I swapped to a different kind of team a few days before, which I do believe was the best decision for me because all my other teams felt really bad, but I had to change my team about like 3 days before the event. I decided to change to a Grimmsnarl screen teams because it was something I had a lot of comfort with back inside of Series 1 or Regulation A, and I was pretty good with it, so I figured I could pilot that. I ended up going to 1800s on PS on multiple accounts, so I was like, awesome, this is great, I feel amazing and I feel ready.
So he made the change, and the team was working at Worlds as well. Brady won both of his first 2 matches, the second coming against a player who had beaten him multiple times at tournaments throughout the season. At 2-0, he was in great shape, but he knew his day was over when the judges interrupted the 3rd round of play.
So there I was, round 3, they told me they had to see me. They did not let me play game 2 of my round 3. And I was like, oh shoot, I kind of know where this is going. They just told me, it's like, hey, unfortunately 3 of your Pokemon were found out to be modified or hacked.
If you're a firm believer that people like Francesco and Brady are simply lazy cheaters who through their individual actions ruin the competitive integrity of Pokemon, and that this problem would simply be solved if everyone just stopped cheating, I encourage you to stick around for the rest of the video. It's partially aimed at you. Traveling can be expensive and stressful. Part of the reason I wanted to host this tournament is that I genuinely felt bad for these players having spent so much money on traveling and not getting anything out of it. I wanted for them to have a chance to compete for some money to make their travel expenses back. But there is another way that can actually help you save money on traveling out of all the things, and that's NordVPN, the sponsor of this video. NordVPN has a ton of different uses when it comes to cybersecurity, but the most real-world use I've found for NordVPN is actually saving money. If you're booking a hotel or a rental car, the prices that a lot of those websites will give you are actually very dependent on the location that you're on. This is because the website is checking if you're maybe being a traveler or not, and if they think that you're a traveler, they're going to charge you more. Depending on what location you change to with NordVPN, you can get vastly different prices on these kinds of bookings. I've done this and it actually literally worked. Nord also allows you to maintain access to all of your favorite streaming services on your travels. The libraries in different countries can look vastly different, and you can make sure you get the same experience that you get back home by using a VPN. Nord has a 30-day money-back guarantee. They have 24/7 customer support. If you're not happy or something's not working, they've got you covered. If this sounds nice to you, or you feel like you need a VPN, some point down the line, just think back to me, code PokemonChallenges, or go to my link in the description or the pinned comment. Get a huge discount for the first 2 years off NordVPN. Thanks so much for Nord for sponsoring this video. Let's get back into it. Bringing attention to this issue was my main reason for hosting the tournament, because I believe that the solution for a lot of issues lies not within the actions of any individual, but can be found within the system that these individuals exist in. Hear me out here. Understanding what happened at this tournament all starts with understanding these regulations that Brady is talking about. Prior to the Sword and Shield era, VGC's rule sets were typically set in stone for a full year. Take Generation 6 X and Y, for example. 2014, the first full year the games were out, was played in a regional dex format, which only allowed Pokemon from the Kalos Pokedex to be used. This famously led to the meta where Sejun Park was able to win Worlds with Pachirisu. The next year, 2015, included Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, and expanded the set of legal Pokemon to include everything but box legendaries like Kyogre and Groudon. Finally, VGC 2016 opened things up to the legendaries, allowing 2 restricted Pokemon on either team, as well as anything else you wanted to use. This was the pattern the VGC season followed in Gen 7 as well, but Generation 8 and 9 have operated on this idea of rotating regulations. In the Scarlet and Violet era, this began with the Regulation A that Brady mentioned using Grimmsnarl in. This format included just the Paldea Pokedex and banned the incredibly powerful Paradox Pokemon, such as Fluttermane and Iron Hands. After just a couple of months, Regulation B added these 12 Pokemon, shaking up the meta incredibly. Orlando Regionals, the first after the switch to Regulation B, saw 3 Paradox Pokemon atop the usage charts. Regulation C went even further, adding the new legendary Ruinous Quartet. 3 of the 4, sorry Wochien, were absolutely meta-defining, landing in the top 8 of the Regulation C usage ranks. With each regulation shift, players were essentially forced to return to the drawing board and build entirely new teams around the Pokemon added to the meta. The constant rule shifts are something Francesco sees as one of the major issues leading to the genning DQs at Worlds. He and Brady, after all, were just 2 of over 20 players who found themselves in the same situation.
This also links with the whole situation and all the genning problem that we had. I would heavily rework or completely remove the series-like structure, because having one metagame per year helps so much players who develop a style or perfect a team that they have been using since the beginning. It's a skill set that you have as a top Pokemon player, in my opinion. You have to be able to understand all the trends and adapt your team in a way that it performs well against the top meta teams. With the series being so short, we are just seeing like one main team develop and maybe another 2.
This was with regulations that were adding just a few Pokemon at a time though. The Regulation D update would not be that. Regulation D was announced just before the release of Pokemon Home. The floodgates were opened. Over 100 Pokemon were now transferable to Scarlet Violet through Home, and many of them were instantly meta relevant. At Worlds, the meta was dominated by Pokemon you could not get simply through Scarlet or Violet. Just to get the 4 Pokemon that were on more than 50% of Day 2 teams, you'd need Scarlet to get Fluttermane, Violet to get Iron Hands, the Isle of Armor DLC to get Urshifu, and some sort of transfer for Tornadus. Players had all of 1 month to adapt to this new meta, figure out what was good, and build a team for the highest stakes tournament of the year. It was a lot, especially when you're asking them to theorycraft, build, adjust, and finalize their teams all in that time span. I think a good rough estimate is that to build a competitive team from scratch requires you to own 4 to 5 Pokemon titles and takes anywhere between 20 and 60 hours of active playtime. Remember that this is for one initial team. If you want to change your team because of meta shifts, or you made a mistake, or you found an optimization right before the tournament, that can be dozens of additional hours. Perhaps that's doable if you could dedicate yourself to all of this in the comfort of your own home with all the games and equipment necessary at the ready for the 3 days leading up to the tournament. Brady was able to scavenge his Scarlet and Violet save files for 3 of the 6 Pokemon that he needed for his team.
And then for 3 of the Pokemon, I got from a friend who got them legitimately. And those were the 3 that got flagged. Basically, what I did though is I modified the legitimate Pokemon because I was trying to make sure the Pokemon were as legit as possible. First of all, I opened in PKHex. I made sure that 3 of the Pokemon were legitimate. They were actually like from like a real game, and they were caught legit. I just cloned them, opened them in PKHex, you know, added some funny numbers on there, made them my spreads. Basically, all I did, I bottle capped the IVs, added my moves and my EVs, and then I just ginned them in-game. So technically, I just modified Pokemon, and they failed the hack check because I did not put them into Pokemon Home.
So I want you to think about this. Brady couldn't be sure if the Pokemon he had gotten from his friend were legit, so to make sure they would show up as legit, he genned them in a way that he thought would show up as legit to the hack checks he was familiar with. Because the only way to check for yourself if a Pokemon will pass a hack check is to put it into a program that is also used for genning. TPCI offers no way for players to check Pokemon legitimacy themselves, hence why they put out a statement advising against getting Pokemon from other players.
Sometimes I do reflect on it. I just think like, wow, if only I would have been able to know that my home tracker was set to 0. If only I just would have put my Pokemon to Pokemon Home. Do I have regret for genning my Pokemon? No, like not at all, because that's just the standard. It kind of felt robbed for me, but on the other hand, it's like, you know, like you reap what you sow. It's like, I did modify my Pokemon, you know, and it's just like, yeah, I get that, but it's just like, damn, man, it just kind of sucks.
Admittedly, I understand if Brady's story doesn't move you. He did break the rules in bringing hacked Pokemon, and he admits to this completely. But in changing the hack check process for the final tournament of the competitive season, TPC blindsided multiple players with definitions of hacked Pokemon that were inconsistent with what they had come to expect, and in ways that they had no way to double check for themselves, or really prepare for in any way. The most heartbreaking story of the weekend involved a player who had gone to great lengths to acquire his Pokemon legitimately. He had a Cresselia that he had been trading up since Generation 5. At hack check at Yokohama, he learned that many years ago, somewhere along the line of players that had it before him, someone had actually modified that Cresselia. The only way he could have checked that Cresselia? By using pKex, the tool that Brady used to modify his Pokemon. He was just one of the players who didn't heed the Pokemon Company's hack check warning because they thought they didn't need to.
Hi there, I'm Gavin Michaels. I'm from Los Angeles, California. I've been playing VGC for over a decade now. I've won a national and an international and a whole bunch of regionals.
Gavin was one of those players who accumulated enough points throughout the season to start on day 2. He had been enjoying success with Rain teams all season, and even won the Oceania International Championships with a team centered around Pelipper and Palafin. The introduction of the home Pokemon brought another perfect Rain exploiter for him to play with, Basculegion, which can become an unstoppable late-game sweeper.
This year for Worlds, I brought a hard Rain team. I've been using Rain the whole season, and it only felt right to end off with it. So I was using a team with Basculegion and Pelipper, and importantly, no Fluttermane or Urshifu. So in the middle of round 2, when I was playing game 3 against my opponent, the judges come up and say, both of you can forfeit your games now. And it's like, and I already knew at that point that like, it must have been an issue with me because my opponent made it through day 1 unscathed, like didn't get any like hat check or anything. So they bring me to the side and tell me that there were signs that my Basculegion was modified. I was surprised about that because I had gotten a clone of my friend's legit Basculegion, so I was kind of confused how that happened. And they said I can continue playing, but at that point, being 0-2 down like my most important Pokemon on the team, I decided screw it and just dropped myself from the tournament there.
Gavin was one of the players lucky enough to only have one Pokemon flagged as illegitimate by the hack check, and the judges allowed these players to continue on with their remaining legitimate Pokemon. As Brady points out, there were probably some Day 2 players who were able to adjust their teams and replace their Pokemon in time for the next day's competition.
Day 1 players, we were like the guinea pigs. Like Day 2 players at this point, they knew something was fishy and they could figure it out. It's like, oh, it was the home modifications. So they could just like gin their Pokemon and just fix like the home. And the majority of Day 2 players did actually.
Gavin was there for Day 1 and was fully aware of all the DQs from the day's hack checks. He knew he had a cloned Pokemon. Why not change the team?
I was really confused as to what even happened because I had never I had never had a penalty leading up to this. 2, I had never been like suspected of genning or anything either. Like everything always looked 100% legit. So I was angry, confused. I go back to check what even happened. And turns out that the only reason I got caught was because of a glitch with trade bots specifically for Legends Arceus, where if they if you trade a Legends Arceus Pokemon, like over, for some reason, only that home tracker gets wiped. And this is something that I would have known ahead of time if we played any Legends Arceus legal Pokemon before this tournament. But because they introduced the hack check for this tournament, and because they introduced Legends Arceus Pokemon for this tournament at the same time, it kind of created a perfect storm. So it's just, what can you do?
Gavin offers a familiar explanation for 2023's explosion in disqualifications after a season where you'd almost never hear of a failed hack check.
The reason we saw so many disqualifications this year was because, 1, this is the first time of them implementing this new system, and 2, there were specific issues with Legends Arceus and how people genned Pokemon that made it so that it flagged up on this system. And I think what makes it really silly is that we know that several people who did well in Worlds modified their Pokemon. And so it just ended up giving penalties based off of this arbitrary hacking criteria instead of catching the actual hacking criteria, where we know the world champion modified the stats of his Pokemon, but that didn't get flagged, but a home tracker did.
According to Caphonics, the developer of the tool PK Hex, world champion Shohei Kimura had an impossible Amoonguss. It had a 0 IV in attack when there's no way the raid it was supposedly caught from could produce it in combination with its other IVs. This is just one reason Gavin and many others don't believe the Pokemon Company's approach is better for the average competitor.
The team that ended up winning Worlds became a big meta threat like 1 week beforehand. So it's like you needed to have your finger on the pulse and be willing to make these last minute changes, which you either have a lot of friends who have all of this stuff in game that can do it for you, or you gen. And the fact of the matter is that like giving these harsher penalties just mean that people who have larger friend networks are just going to be able to ask them and get the mons easily. I'm never going to fail a hack check in the future despite never getting my own Pokemon, because I know people and I can just ask them to get it for me. The only people that this punishes are people who aren't as integrated in the community and can't get the Pokemon for themselves.
Okay, time for the opinion part of the video. Do you see the same picture I'm seeing here? It feels like TPCI is building an extremely intransparent environment in which players are incentivized to take shortcuts and play the metagame of understanding which gen Pokemon pass hack checks and which don't. It's not that cheaters get disqualified, it's that players that cheat in a way that happen to be detectable get disqualified. Do I think players like Brady and Francesco should have been disqualified? Of course they should have. They knew the rules beforehand and decided to break them. They took a shortcut and other players didn't. The players that decided to play by the rules and put the extra time in should be rewarded. The people that practiced hard and stayed up all night making changes to their legitimate team the night before the tournament are the ones being undermined if we simply let people cheat. For their sake, it is correct and good that cheaters were disqualified here. But the point I wanted to draw attention to by hosting this tournament is not that these players were somehow unjustly disqualified. It is that the system that has been built around them makes cheating inevitable, and the competitive game of Pokemon worse as a whole. Think about the situations that were described here by the players. Put yourself in their shoes. Doesn't this all kind of suck? Why not just let them gen? Or even, why not give Pokemon players tools to build a team in minutes instead of hours? When two players are up there on stage in the finals, do you think about how they sat there mindlessly mashing buttons for hours? Or do you want to see them play the best Pokemon they possibly can? Don't you, as a viewer of this sport, want players to have as much time as possible to practice? Doesn't that result in better games for everyone? Why don't we see this many cheaters in other competitive video games? In fact, there's one example from competitive League of Legends where somebody cheated at a world championship. The players were set up in front of a giant screen in front of a crowd. The giant screen had the game that they were playing. During one of the games, one of the players turned around to the giant screen, obviously giving him information that he shouldn't have access to in the game. The player was punished, and I believe the team might have been disqualified. And that was good, and I wouldn't complain about that. But after that, Riot Games never ran the same setup again. Riot Games learned from the situation in the correct way, and instead of putting the blame on the players, took it for themselves and changed their system. I want you to imagine a universe in which competitive football players all around the world are required to bring hand-stitched balls by themselves to play the game. Would you really be surprised if players started showing up with balls that were secretly made by other people? I want you to think about that parallel universe compared to our own and ask yourself, which one would you rather live in? That's why I held the tournament. Anyway, before the video ends, let's shit a little bit more on TPCI's ability to run tournaments. Because the worst and most clear failure of the event was not even the hack checks. The single elimination bracket is always the most tense part of any VGC tournament. Here, it's win or go home. Connecting all the switches in use at Pokemon events requires Herculean feats of networking. Entire tables of games get routed through the same surge protectors and server boxes. During the single elimination brackets round of 16, with 3 games still in progress, something got disconnected. And that meant everybody got disconnected. If this were Pokemon Showdown, everyone would just reconnect to the server and the game would go on as normal. But on the cartridge, this is a brutal situation to resolve. Returning to the game state at the time of disconnection is basically impossible because of the sheer number of RNG rolls that go into even a couple of turns of VGC games. To make matters worse, the games that were disconnected were deep into the deciding third game of the best of 3 set.
I'm Luca Lucignoli. I'm a VGC player from Italy, and I've played the Pokemon since 2013, I think. So yeah, I played for a long time. I attended 3 World Championship so far, 2017, 2018, and this year World Championship. The first 2 didn't go that well, so I was determined this year to place well, and yeah, I finished 9, going undefeated in the Swiss round.
This sounds like it was the ultimate redemption story for Luca, the perfect way to wash the bad taste of his first 2 world performances away. But the reason Luca finished 9th is he was one of the 3 players to lose in a sudden death in the round of 16.
I went 7-0 in Swiss, and I got the bye for the top 32. So I watched the top 32, and then I was called by the judge to play the top 16. And we were all one next to each other playing the last game of the top 16. I think, but I'm not really sure because I was focused on the game, that the internet crashed, and so the game crashed too. And we were forced to play a sudden death.
Luca was not the only player to get screwed over by this ruling. Emilio Forbes, one of the season's most consistent competitors, also found himself in a similar position, with a huge lead in what should have been the deciding Game 3, only for all that to get upended by the disconnection and a loss in the sudden death game. Basically, a sudden death means that the players start a new game, and the first to get a knockout, without their opponent taking a knockout, gets the win. If these guys think they would have won their games without a disconnect, why couldn't they just win the sudden death game as well? Well, it's not that simple, right? The same strategies that might give a team an advantage in a best of 3 might not come into play in a sudden death.
I think I had the upper hand in that matchup because my opponent didn't know all my spread. I played the sudden death, and my matchup in the sudden death was not really good, I think. And I lost, and I got knocked out of the tournament without the chance to play another full game.
The matchup Luca was facing could not have been worse for a sudden death specifically.
Team that have strong EV hitters, like my opponent had Choice Band Dragonite. It was a tricky situation, and in general, team that have 3 or 4 Pokemon that do a lot of damage, I think are in an advantage in a sudden death because they can take a KO before you.
After 9 rounds of near perfect play, Luca's tournament life came down to a game that was played by completely different rules than the ones that had gotten both players to that point.
I was mad, but I was not mad because I lost. I was mad because I couldn't prove myself if I was good enough to win the World Tournament. After I went 7-0, I was really excited. I was thinking, I beat a lot of good players, I can do it. The fact that I had the chance of playing a full game and on a sudden death was heartbreaking. I mean, that's the worst part, because I couldn't win World.
Technical issues happen. They happened at my tournament too. But what matters is coming to a resolution that still respects the competition the players signed up for, and this wasn't it. Clearly, the Pokemon Company agrees that this is an unacceptable way to resolve a match with this much on the line. Within a month, the rules were updated to give judges the discretion to replace sudden death with another normal game in situations like we saw at Worlds. It's great that future events will be better, but that's not much of a consolation for the players who spent a full year competing and thousands upon thousands of dollars just for their experience to be ruined by the tournament's mismanagement and misplaced priorities. And that's why I invited not only the hacking players, but also everyone who was forced into a sudden death, whether they won or lost, to my tournament. I was there in Yokohama for Worlds, and I saw and talked to many of the players that dealt with the issues of the tournament firsthand. Seeing the incompetence at play, I thought, I can do better. Let's give these guys another chance to win some money. The full tournament will be posted one day after this video comes out if you want to see how everyone did. Thanks to all the competitors, especially the ones who were willing to come on for an interview. I hope we can see this beautiful game become a real esport one day. Until then, cheaters will always have a home on my channel.